Hey everybody, Tony D with another screenwriting tip. So we're going to talk today about diversity and inclusion. Is diversity and inclusion important in your screenplay? Not really, because diversity and inclusion are just buzzwords that are being tossed about on Twitter and they don't really mean much. You know, when it comes to screenplays, just like any other piece of art, it's about the inspiration for the art. So it could be a very diverse cast. You could be inspired, and that inspiration may take you down a road where the characters should be very diverse because you want them to be different. You want them to have different backgrounds and come from different cultures because that's part of the story, and that anything that drives the story forward, that's a good thing. You want to include black characters, and that's important to the screenplay. You know, Netflix and some of my friends are recommending The Five Bloods, currently on Netflix. Haven't seen it yet, but it's important in that film that all the characters are black because that's key to the whole film. Now, I'm not saying don't make the characters black if it's not key, but I'm saying that helps move the story forward, right? And I think part of the issue is most writers write for themselves and about themselves. And what I mean by that is when you're thinking of your main protagonist, you have a default setting. And your default setting is usually you or a person very much like you. So you start with that first. And if there's no reason to change that person, change that person's gender or sex or gender, race, religion, you probably won't change it. Not because you're a racist, just because you're not thinking about that. You're thinking about the plot and moving the story forward. And because gender or religion or race isn't important to the story when you're creating it, you just go with what you know. Because you should write what you know. Because you'll get a better feeling for it. That's why I write a lot of mafia stuff. Because I'm Italian and I know that world a little better. I know Italians and I know the Italian words. So I wasn't totally lost watching The Sopranos. I knew those words. You know, when they went to get some gabagool, I was like, oh, okay. Now, some of you out there goes, gabagool? What? When they're eating scungili, I'm like, oh yeah, scungili. Like, I know those words. I shouldn't say it's my world. It's my world adjacent because I'm Italian, not that I'm in the mob. So, you know, that stuff, for me, I write that kind of stuff. I've got tons of mafia stuff because I wrote Complete Mafia for D20. Now, somebody who's not Italian would have to read about all this stuff. They would have to absorb it and then write about it. That's a lot of work. And even if they did all that, probably wouldn't ring as true as my stuff because I've actually lived a little bit of it. I've lived it enough that I know what it's like to have an old Italian grandma who makes delicious food. It's just different. It's not wrong or right. It's just different. So if you're killing yourself over diversity and inclusion, well, you know, I get it. I mean, look, Hollywood wants what it wants. So yeah, you throw in a few characters of color or whatever. You know, you don't have to go nuts. You could mix things up a little bit, or you can keep them pretty generic because you could always switch people out. If it doesn't matter the race or religion in a screenplay, if that's not an element, then any actor or actress can play the character anyway. So what's the difference? I mean, look at the characters in Aliens, right? You have Ripley. Would it have made a difference if Ripley was black? No, would have been the same movie. Ripley could be black, she could be white. You know, at the time, this was 79. This was like an empowered female character who takes over for the captain. She was number 2. Captain, spoilers, dies, and she takes over. It didn't really matter. It could have been a guy. Could have been a guy. Could have been a gay guy. It doesn't matter. That wasn't important to the story. Aliens wasn't about the race of the people in it. Although it was I would say it was a fairly inclusive cast. You know, you had had at least one black character, maybe two. And I think was there a Latino guy in it too? Can't remember. But there were women in the crew. I mean, it was the future. So like Star Trek, they kind of sort of project into what that's like. Everybody's kind of the same. They're just working stiffs on a spaceship kind of thing. So, you can use diversity and inclusiveness to your advantage in that if you have characters, and especially if it takes place in the modern day, and you have characters that are, well, they don't really have, you don't know if they're white, they could be anything. So you can make some of them people of color, why not? But if it's not important to the story, why are you going to mention it? Then you're just pandering. But if it's important to the story in some way, and it could be a very small way that it'll be important, right? So you might have a character who's a person of color, and maybe during the course of the story, they go into a neighborhood that's mostly black, and because of that, this person of color knows a lot of people in that neighborhood. That's where he's from, right? And, maybe it's a cop story, and then he's got a lot of contacts there, and it's his friends, and, that works. But, it might be the opposite. You might need the screenplay to go in the other direction. You might need the locals to be completely hostile to the cops coming into their neighborhood. And it would be better if both the cops weren't people of color, they were white. So, don't get wrapped around the axle with this diversity and inclusive nonsense, because it's going to die. And it's going to die a terrible, terrible death. Because when it finally does go, you don't want to have that kind of language in your screenplay. Because if it's just there, just to be diverse and inclusive, it doesn't belong there. If it doesn't drive the story forward, it's just fat. And you got to trim the fat on a screenplay. Screenplays are about structure, number one. They're about moving the story forward, number two. And, they're about good characters, good plot, all that good stuff. So diversity and inclusion, man, that's way down on the list. I know you don't want to hear this, Twitter. But Twitter is also not a source to be listened to ever. Because Twitter is used by something like 2% of the U.S. population, slightly more on the world stage maybe. But still, it's a very low number when you get right down to it. So if you have 100 people in the room, maybe 2 of them are on Twitter, maybe 3. Who cares? The majority of the room, including those people on Twitter, want to hear a good story. If your story's no good, you can have all the inclusiveness and diversity in the world, and it's not going to matter. Focus on your story. Don't get caught up in all this BS. This is a trend, and it's going to end. And it's going to end hard.